today. Can I get a sense of how many people attended one of our information sessions and or online? Okay, so good number of you. It's okay if you didn't. For those of you who are repeats from the info session, you're going to get immersed again in all things Generation Next and in Social Innovation Fund. So it's a little bit repetitive, but ultimately will be helpful in terms of getting your application ready. And then we are going to dig into kind of the nitty-gritty of the work of the RFP that you see in front of you. So good morning. My name is Megan Barp. I am the Vice President of Community Impact here at Greater Twin Cities United Way and the project lead on the Social Innovation Fund. Wanted to share the agenda with you this morning of things that we're going to cover. So first and foremost, we will be focusing, of course, on introducing the team behind us here at United Way, talking more about Generation Next, formerly known as Twin Cities Strive. So if you're wondering what the change up is in the lingo, official last Thursday, we are now calling it Generation Next, and Michael Gore is here to talk about that. I will give a brief overview of the Social Innovation Fund again. We will then talk about the actual RFP and application so that you can get immersed in what we'll be looking for strong applicants. We'll be talking again about evaluation and some of the financial compliance components. And then we will do an in-depth overview of how to actually apply online. So Michael Grafe will walk us through that so that we're well aware of that. I want to point out some key documents that you have at your fingertips to help us be successful. One is that at your table you should have a copy of the deck that we're sharing this morning, the PowerPoint presentation, so that you can go back and reference that. You also have a copy of the RFP at your spot, so you'll be able to dig into that and ask any questions. I will say that all of the materials are available on our website, which is it's Monday morning, unitedwaytwincities.org/SIF for Social Innovation Fund, and you'll find copies of everything there for your reference beyond this. I will also say that 2 documents you'll find on our website, the frequently asked questions, as well as documents to help you build your theory of change for your application, and more information on building a logic model. So I know that many of you already do this in your current work, but if you want resources or tools to look at that I think will be helpful, that's the place to go to find them. They're pretty lengthy, so we did not print out copies, and they're just suggested tools. They're not required tools, so I just want to point that out as well. Clicker's not working. So I want to introduce the Social Innovation Fund team. We have everyone here that will be working on this. Michael Gore, who is the Executive Director of Generation Next, will be working in partnership for our Social Innovation Fund. Michael Micklin, who is from Cary at the University of Minnesota, who will be talking more about the evaluation work. Naomi Zook-Fisher, who is fresh off of maternity leave and works for the education team here at United Way, will be immersed in Social Innovation Fund before she knows it. Elise Weiner, who is our controller here at Greater Twin Cities United Way, working on all things compliance. You'll hear from her in a moment. Lorinda Sagnot, who is in the back there, who's all things operations and the glue that all of this together. Michael Grafe, who's right up here, who has been working on our application and will be sharing more about how to actually apply for the Social Innovation Fund. And then I also want to recognize Sherry Steer, who's sitting in the back making things happen for the webinar, also on our IT team here, and has been instrumental in making this run smoothly. So I wanted to frame out quickly before we dig into the details what the opportunity actually entails. We have $800,000 that are available for funds to make grants for the Social Innovation Fund. So as you might imagine, it's highly competitive. We expect quite a few applications, not only from the peers that you see here in this room, people who are attending via webinar, and then also another session that we have tomorrow. So there's a lot of interest for the Social Innovation Fund. We are making up to 8 grants available through this. The minimum award will be $100,000, but we will be looking at applicants who meet the key criteria and have very strong applications. So we potentially will be making larger awards to fewer grantees. So know that it is up to 8, but if we have really strong partnerships and proposals that come in, we will be making bigger awards to a smaller number of sub-grantees. And we'll talk more about that as we go through this. And then I also wanted to share the timeline with you. The RFP has been officially released as of 7 minutes ago at 9 a.m. this morning. And so from now until January 11th, you have time to apply for the funds. It's due at noon Central on January 11th. Applications won't be accepted post-noon. And the reason why I say Central is because this is a national funding opportunity for folks to apply outside of the state of Minnesota, but deliver services within the Twin Cities. So 12 o'clock on January 11th. I will say that it's not lost on us that this is over the holiday season, and apologies for that. It's a very rigorous timeline on behalf of the federal government, and so just wanting to recognize that we know that it is over the holidays, and we certainly will be tugging along on some of the requirements here as well. Between January 11th and through April 1st is when we'll be digging in and reading proposals. We'll be conducting site visits with those of you who have really strong applications. There's potential that you'll be presenting to the Generation Next Executive Committee and other key staff with your ideas around your program. We'll be building those timeframes out as we go, and we'll be sharing that with applicants who are chosen to move forward in this process. And ultimately, post-approval in March 2013 from that Executive Committee, we will be getting funding out the door on April 1st. That is when the actual, let me correct that, it won't happen on April 1st. Awards will be made on April 1st in terms of announcements. And Elise will talk more about finance stuff here in a bit. So we'll review that timeline at the end again so that you all have it. It's also in your packet. But for now, I'll turn it over to Michael Gore, who will be talking about Generation Next. Or you can use this one if it's here. Yes.
Good morning. So you're going to meet three different Michaels. I'm the first one of the three. Not the most important one, though. How many of you attended our launch on Thursday on Generation Next? Okay. Those of you who attended will get extra credit. Those of you who did not will have a chance to make it up. As Megan said, we are here to talk to you about our work. And specifically, I want to talk to you a little bit about Generation Next and how the work of the CIF, or the grant itself, is connected and to support our work in Generation Next. So I want to make clear in terms of how is it connected. And the connection is the work that we're doing in Generation Next. So Generation Next is a brand new organization formed and worked on for many months by many different stakeholders. Some of you have been involved in formation of Generation Next. Some of you are new to the concept of Generation Next. The purpose, the pure, simple way of describing Generation Next is two ways. One is collective approach to solve the achievement gap. Okay, so what we're all about is collective approach and solving achievement gap. In simplest way, explaining the work of Generation Next. So the work of the Generation Next consists of, obviously, like any organization, setting its mission, visions, and goals. It's been established by our board. Our board consists of many different stakeholders like yourselves, but more importantly, it is a broad stakeholders. So you will have on our board 2 mayors from the Twin Cities, 2 of the superintendents, 2 of the union leaders, teacher union leaders, all the funders, the major funders, and you get the business leaders sitting on our board, and all the higher ed. So my 2 co-chairs are Eric, which is the president of the University of Minnesota, and Kim, who is the senior VP with General Mills. They are 2 of my bosses. So as you can see, in terms of my board, the board that governs Generation Next, you have a broad stakeholders and a wide-ranging view. The purpose of Generation Next is really looking at, as I said, whole education continuum, by making sure the alignment exists. Right now in Twin Cities, there are well over 500 separate initiatives. Probably some of you included in that count for initiative count, spending well over $90 million per year. $90 million, what we're talking about is private funding resources. So you got foundations and private corporations spending with community partners over $90 million to get at the issue of achievement gap. And you know the issues of achievement gap in terms of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Right now, Generation Next is only focusing on 2 school districts, Minneapolis and St. Paul, And that is a primary focus that we're doing. So the work that we're interested in of you is focusing on really 5 different areas supporting our students in Minneapolis and St. Paul. First, obviously, it's kindergarten readiness. As you know, we need to make sure our kids are ready to learn and when they come into school. So we have a major initiative, and some of you have been involved in work with United Way in terms of kindergarten work. So we want to make sure that we have kids ready to learn in kindergarten. And go into grade 3. And those of you who are involved in K-12, you have to have kids be proficient by grade 3. If they're not proficient and by grade 3, they're 4 times likely not graduate from high school. So there's a major work that we're doing in terms of 3rd grade proficiency. Next is 8th grade math. That is a major benchmark. In order for students to be ready for college, they have to have proficiency in 8th grade math, specifically algebra, in order for them to start getting into AP, Calc, and so on. Then high school graduation. Just on a side note, just on a 1 point of data, at Minneapolis Public Schools, which I'm most familiar with, you have over 70% of white students graduating, compared to only 25% of Native American students, 30% for African American and Latino students. So you can see the gap that we're trying to narrow. So our work in terms of Generation Next is through the student continuum. We want to make sure we narrow the gap. So what we're looking for in terms of you is how you're going to support the work. And what we want to do is understand it, replicate it, and you will hear a lot more from my colleague about the data aspect of your work. The essence of the Generation Next is to want to know what's working, and you want to replicate the successful model and sustain it in the long term. As I stated earlier, we have a 500 separate initiatives supporting this continuum. As you can see from the evidence would be data in terms of students not graduating from high school. What we're doing right now is not working. Some of you, I'm sure, are doing great work, but there's no sustainability, no scalability. And we want to make sure there is a coherent structure in place. And our job in Generation Next is to create that system. Okay? So how are we going to do that? We'll be launching in March 2 networks. These are the networks would be a body or group of folks who will be sitting together to examine what's working, what's not working, looking at data. And we're going to begin to identify practices that are working and scale it, and begin to identify practices that are not working and begin to make recommendations to our board. Okay? So we're going to launch early literacy as a first of our work, along with we're going to have a college and career readiness, 2 networks launching. And then we're going to have a second phase of our work, which will be teacher quality, as well as family engagement, which being a second part of our launching of the network itself. So what we're interested in is really seeing and identifying proposals that you will have, you begin to work on. How you're going to support this 5 particular framework of 5 goals in context of some of the launches we're going to be undertaking. So if you are looking to identify in the arena of early literacy, we are very much interested in your work that you're proposing, because we want to see the data, and you'll hear a lot more about data later, and we want to replicate successful models, okay? And as well as college and career readiness. And we are connecting all that in context of this. It is a completely aligned in terms of our 5 goals to our networks we're launching. So obviously, as I said earlier, there are 5 goals, 5 community goals our board has identified. Then we are launching networks that will support each of the goals. So 2 networks that we're launching immediately in come March, as I say, is early literacy and college career readiness. And obviously within early literacy, there's broad spectrum and same token for college career readiness. And so we're interested in some of your ideas and your thoughts in terms of how you can support some of this, some of the work that I just talked about, as well as subsequently we'll be launching 2 additional networks. So what we're looking for is your work in either in kindergarten readiness, 3rd grade reading, math, graduation, college career readiness, post-secondary completion. So those are 5 broad goals we have in terms of Generation Next. And SIF is resourced to support, augment some of those particular goals. However, that is not our primary goal. Our goal is not to really handout resources, rather to realign existing resources in conjunction with our partnership that we're creating with the funders as well as all of you who are providers. Okay?
Thank you, Michael. And we'll talk more about this as we go into this, but we are looking for, and this came up out of the information session, that you cover one or more of the goals. So we'll talk more about that, but that is a really good overview, so thank you. So I want to spend some time talking about the actual Social Innovation Fund and the purpose of the fund. So this fund is about 3 years old. We are in year 3 of being a recipient, so it's the first year for Greater Twin Cities United Way. And essentially it stems out of what is known as the Corporation of National and Community Service, which is a federal branch, which many of you may know for AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, things like that. They have a small fund, relatively small, called the Social Innovation Fund. And essentially the essence is that DC does not have the solutions to what's happening at a community level. So they're working to identify strong intermediary organizations like Greater Twin Cities United Way, who can then take those funds, match them, and then ultimately grant them out to the community to get at pressing issues. So they have 3 areas that they focus on. One of those areas is economic development. Another one is youth development, and that's the arena that Greater Twin Cities United Way has their grant in. And really it's about making sure that we're investing in strategies that have the ability to not only have an impact, so that's exactly what Michael is saying, but that you can take those ideas with impact to scale. So we're really looking for those innovative ideas that are research and evidence-based and that have the ability to meet the needs of more kids and families in our community. So we also know that what's really important from the Social Innovation Fund is that we share those key learnings and that information with other providers. So one of the beautiful parts of the Social Innovation Fund is that ultimately with the sub-grantees that we select, we will be sharing that information for the greater good of the community. So that's something that's really important to us. We also think that there are some really influential aspects of SIF that will be leveraged on the federal level, and that includes things like affecting change in policy and making sure that those best practices are shared outside of our own community and with other SIF grantees and broader youth development community. So overall, throughout the nation, there's about 20 Social Innovation Fund grantees, and we're one of them. There is an expectation that United Way shares the key learnings of what we're doing here in the Twin Cities with that broader community. The theory of change for the Social Innovation Fund is essentially that the dollars are driven into the grant program. So you see up here the selection of intermediaries. In this case, the intermediary is Greater Twin Cities United Way. We are selecting sub-grantees for growth and impact based on evidence and evaluating. You're going to hear a lot about the evaluation. All of you have already had a good, strong dose. Most of you have had a strong dose of the evaluation. You'll get another one this morning from Michael Micklin. Taking that, leveraging strategy. So again, how do we influence on that federal level? And ultimately, we're looking at taking these good ideas that all of you are thinking of for your application and taking those to scale. And at the end of the day, what we really care about is this aspect right here, is that we're actually improving the needs, or I'm sorry, improving the lives of the people in need. And so really making sure that the programs are addressing the most pressing needs in our community. And you'll see that outlined in the RFP in terms of what we're looking for in terms of poverty guidelines and communities that we would like you to work with. And to reiterate what Michael was just talking about in terms of Generation Next, we're looking at these 5 goals as the overarching goals, and then ultimately will drive into affecting change in the community. So we have been awarded here at United Way a $2 million grant for 2 years. So when you apply, you'll see a lot of information around putting in program information for 2 years, a budget for 2 years. We're guaranteed that funding based on our performance and based on availability of funds, which would be the same for our sub-grantees. And really looking for strong applicants who can, again, meet one or more of these community goals that Generation Next is focusing on. So that's really what your application should focus on. And then the SIF model is really distinguished by these 4 areas. So again, it's supporting the infrastructure through the intermediaries, focusing on that evidence. You'll see in the RFP that we're requesting you to show us the levels of evidence that you already have with your program or that similar programs have obtained with that model. So there's some flexibility there in terms of evidence that we'll talk more about. You will be part of an overall portfolio evaluation, meaning all of the subgrantees come together as part of the evaluation, and then we'll be developing individual evaluations with each of the subgrantees as well. And then match. The match is really important for social innovation funds. So United Way is required to match dollar for dollar as the recipient of the social innovation fund, and then ultimately our subgrantees are also required to match dollar for dollar for the subgrant award that you're applying for. So what that means, and we'll talk a lot about this, but by January 11th, you'll have to demonstrate a commitment of at least 50% of the match for your application. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to come in and check that you have that 50% in hand. A lot of times that will look like a letter that you'll have from a funder saying, if this person should be awarded or this organization should be awarded this grant, we will then commit X number of dollars. But we do need to know that you have at least a commitment of 50% of what you're asking for by January 11th, with that full commitment by April 1st, should you be awarded. And then a general willingness and appetite for sharing the information that you're learning, sharing it with the broader community, and ultimately helping other programs scale the good ideas that you all have that actually work. I want to dig in a little bit more to the RFP and the application. So you have the RFP in front of you at the table. My biggest recommendation and the biggest takeaway that I have for all of you today is to go back and thoroughly read the RFP, the application, the corporation supporting documents, the documents and materials around partnerships. There's a lot of information, but the better equipped that you and your team are around the Social Innovation Fund leading into applying, the better off you'll be within the application process. Can I get a sense in the room of how many of you are currently United Way funded? Okay, so quite a few. So my request to you is to go into this with an open mind, because when you see the actual application, it's not going to look like a United Way RFP process. It'll look very different from what you've seen from us in the past. So instead of us saying we've identified these 6 outcome indicators that are shared across all of you, and we want you to tell us how many people you're working with and what the outcome is, this is really saying our end goals are the 5 overarching goals of Generation Next. And we want you to tell us through your theory of change and through your logic model, program design, all of those elements that you'll see in the application, how you are actually getting to that end goal. So it looks very different than what you're used to from United Way, so I just want to throw that out there. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have as you go through this. One of the other major differences between this particular opportunity versus a United Way opportunity is that it's open to more than just 501c3s. So cities can apply, schools can apply, a variety of community partners can apply that's outlined in the RFP. So know that that adds another layer of competitiveness to this process that may not be always present in a United Way opportunity. So as I mentioned before, this is a youth development opportunity through the Corporation of National and Community Service. So we want to know that your organization has core competencies in developing and implementing youth development programs. So if youth development is not in your core competency right now, it's unlikely that you would move forward for funding in this round, because we're really looking for established youth development organizations, or organizations who have that as a core competency of their overall work that they're doing. We are looking to partner with subgrantees who are using innovation and evidence to create solutions in the community. So innovation as it relates to the Social Innovation Fund is not let's figure out new strategies that might work. It's looking at how we take evidence and scale that innovation to multiple partners. So while we want really good ideas that are strong and can lead to our good outcomes, we do want that level of evidence that Michael will talk more about in a moment for this. And we are focusing lockstep with Generation Next. We are really focused on the achievement and opportunity gap, which you'll see reiterated over and over in the RFP. Working primarily with populations that are 200% poverty and below is our benchmark. That can also tie into free and reduced lunch, depending on how you're gathering information for your organization, and a variety of other markers that you'll see outlined in the RFP. And then, of course, we want to see that alignment with at least one of the goals within those 5 that Michael framed up that are Generation Next 5 community goals, so at least one of those. Now, one of the questions that has really come up from the information sessions that you'll see in our FAQ that will be posted online is, what if my organization is really strong in 2 of those goal areas, but they're at the opposite ends of the spectrum? So it might be reading by 3rd grade, and it might be college readiness. Unless there's a very clear link and it's one program that you're talking about, you might want to consider submitting 2 proposals. However, just to remind you, it is highly competitive, and make sure that you really feel like you're hitting all of those core components of the RFPs that are outlined if you choose to do that. So we have some special considerations that you'll see outlined in the RFP, and one of those considerations is that we're really looking for applicants to demonstrate that capacity to collaborate with other organizations to meet the end goal, whether it's one of those 5 or multiple goals within that. We want 1 lead applicant, and you'll see this information in the RFP. We want 1 lead applicant, and based on the requirements from the corporation, you cannot sub-grant your grant out to other partners, but you can contract with them. So when I mentioned the website, there's a document on there that you'll see about formal partnerships and collaborations as it relates to this. But know that if you are planning on applying as a collaborative, which we encourage, know that there needs to be 1 lead applicant, and those partners have to be contracted with, not sub-granted to. It's a small distinction, but there's more information on that as well. One of the things that we're really getting at here is that we want to understand the in-depth partnership of how you're getting at this goal. So we're not talking about some of the lighter partnerships that all of us have, that we're partnering with sending our kids to the library, or we're making sure that parents are referred in this way. We want to understand the complex partnership and very specific roles of a team of organizations that would be getting at these results. So for example, if you're a reading by 3rd grade partner, we want to understand how and why you're partnering with a group of people to get at this end goal, and what their specific roles will be within that, whether it's a school, whether it's the city, whether it's a nonprofit. How is that group going to work together to meet the goals of the Social Innovation Fund? From a partnership perspective, if you are not from the city and you're not from the school district or from a school, we do want our community-based organizations, our 501c3s, to demonstrate a formal partnership with your city and or your school. So if you are doing work in conjunction with Minneapolis Public Schools and or St. Paul Public Schools in your community-based organization, we want you to have a formal partnership with that school district so that they're well aware of what you're doing and vice versa. So this is basically, because we're such an academic-focused goal area here with our 5 goals that we've laid out, we want to make sure that the district or the city, depending on the work that you're proposing, is keyed into that and understands the work that you're doing on behalf of the children of the district. Now, if you're the city or if you are the school district and you're applying for this funding, which is definitely a possibility, we want those agreements with the community-based organizations that you'll be working with as well. So it's meant to be a formalized partnership with all. We're highly recommending that you use a memorandum of understanding through this process that's to your own design. We don't have a recommended format on that, but we are recommending that you have that in place. And we will be following up on those partnerships in the site visit review should you make it to that round. So know that that's something that's really important to us, and we are expecting a level of rigor there as well. So make sure that you have that in place, and again, that's outlined in the RFP on page 17, I believe. Key components of the program, and these are a few, and you'll see this outlined further, but we are looking to serve low-income populations, and as I mentioned, that's defined as 200% poverty or below. If you're using free and reduced lunch data, you can use that as well. There's a variety of ways that you can get at this, but you will be expected to tell that story and have a very clear number and outline of how many kids you're serving based on that. We want a very clear acknowledgement and plan for how you're addressing the achievement and the opportunity gap within your proposal. We want to know, again, that you're aligned with the goals of Generation Next, and we do want to make sure that we're serving residents of Minneapolis and or St. Paul. So this has been one that's been asked a lot around the community of whether or not we'll fund kids that are outside of this region or first ring suburbs or countywide. We're really looking at meeting the urban core of Minneapolis and St. Paul, so focusing on our low-income students within Minneapolis and St. Paul. In the application, and I mentioned this before, what you'll see laid out is very different than what you would see in a classic United Way RFP process. We are looking for a very strong theory of change. In this particular application, we're looking for a very strong program design and delivery. And when you think about your program design and delivery, we understand the timing is a little bit awkward, especially for youth development programs, proposals kicking off and announcements on April 1st, not funding, which Elise will talk more about. We recognize that's a little bit awkward in terms of the school year and working with children and youth. And so you will have time to scale up the program and to implement. So there's a pre-implementation phase that you can design and build into that then leads into the actual program implementation. So there's some leeway and flexibility there. And for the sub-grantees that we ultimately select, we will have time to kind of negotiate those terms and figure out what works best for the sub-grantees who are applying for this. Cultural competency is a huge part of this. We know that our kids of color suffer the most from our achievement gap here in the state of Minnesota, and that's really where we want to drive resources and where we ultimately want to make sure that we're aligning our social innovation fund dollars with. So that's a big piece of this as well. And then, of course, overall organizational and programmatic capacity to take on the social innovation fund. You guys have heard me a million times at this point talk about how rigorous this is and how different it is from a United Way grant, and that certainly is something that you should be willing to take on as an organization. If you're thinking about applying for this, we highly recommend that you're talking to your board about this so that they're well aware of what this will entail, taking on this level of grant. And then, of course, an appetite, again, for that evidence and evaluation. That will be really important as part of this, too. And we'll be working hand in hand on this, so it won't be, you won't be doing this alone, which Michael will talk more about here in a moment, but definitely having the willingness to take this on and the organizational capacity to take it on will be very important. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael to talk more about evaluation.
Good morning. All the key themes have been expressed, and I will just drive in some information and some clarity in the area of evaluation. But the one thing that comes to mind to say again, even though you just heard it, is that the grant is unusual in the cooperative nature of its development. Usually, you're working all by yourself, and you're hiring an evaluator if it's required, and you probably don't hire an evaluator if you can get away with it. But this grant is a little different, and what we're looking for in the application process is the demonstration of capacity and enthusiasm for and willingness for, whether we're talking about the evaluation, the nature of your programs, of your cooperative nature in the possibility of coming together with other organizations. Now, I am Michael Micklin. I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement. We're known as CARI around here. And most of what we do is applied research, and most of that is evaluation, or you've heard the phrase program evaluation. And day in and day out, that's mostly what we do. This is going to be a little different for us, too, because we are evaluating both the portfolio level of the SIF program, and colleagues of mine will be working with each of the sub-grantees to do their evaluation. So I'm heading a team. We'll probably be 3, 4, 5 people when it settles down. And we will be working very closely with the sub-grantees. Whoops. I'm sorry, Michael. No, I shouldn't touch electronic things. Yeah. Yeah, I sort of got it. My remarks today will be mostly aimed at the issue around the strength of evidence, and that neglects a lot of things that are in evaluation. I'm not going to say a thing about the kinds of things we'll do in evaluation that have to do with collecting so-called qualitative data. I'm going to be talking numbers today, but it's in the back of my mind. I know it's there, and it's important. We certainly, in any individual sub-grantee approved plan, are going to be doing things that gather data that aren't numbers and that are important to understanding what you're doing and how it works. But that they're not, it's not represented in the slides today, and it's not represented in the few things I'll say in the amount of time we have together to talk about evaluation. But that expectation is there that most of these evaluations will be what are usually called mixed methods. And by mixed methods, we mean we're working both in qualitative and quantitative data gathering and analysis and reporting. So the important point that, again, I'm reiterating what you've already heard, is that the successful sub-grantees will be able to demonstrate a level of evidence that we can call preliminary. That is, they have perhaps a history of doing pre- and post-testing, and they know at post-test time kids score off the charts and are doing terrifically. But in fact, it's only been a testing situation where you've been working with your own, I'll call them kids or clients. So what you haven't been doing is more like what you're doing in testing scientifically on how the new drug works. In other words, you can't randomly assign kids to treatments, and some get the pill and some get the sugar pill, and we see who gets better. So what we're talking about today is moving the rigorousness of the evidence you're gathering and making it stronger. Stronger in what sense? Stronger in the sense that it's more valid. Well, what does that mean? The short story is that it gets more valid as you're able to discount other stories that would explain why kids did better. And that's the sort of thing that's very difficult in social science research, because we can't take the white rat and drop one here and one here and give the one Coke and Hershey's Kisses and this guy Cheerios, and you know who wins. So all things are the same. The rats are litter mates. You don't mind me talking about rats, do you? They're litter mates, and so and General Mills, so it's Cheerios. The Cheerios eating rats do better. They run the maze faster. Their eyes are shinier. All that good stuff. So you'll have a sense of the scientific research. And you have very clean data when Cheerios does better than Coca-Cola. That's so hard to do in social science research. But we're still looking for ways to pit what you're doing with comparison groups. And the degree to which we can get comparison groups to be exactly like the clients or kids you're working with, to that degree, we'll be able to defeat more of the jargon, counterfactuals, the stories about someone claiming, but this and this could have caused that as well. So we want to move away from being unable to talk about the level with which we are validly making claims, that they are more believable, that they are more persuasive. So preliminary evidence, moderate evidence, strong evidence. And everybody who will get a sub-grantee award has to be at the preliminary level going in. It doesn't mean that you've ran the test yourself. You might know from the literature where you draw your theory that your efforts work and the data is available, but it's from someone else. That's going to work to tell your story as well. You may have your own pre-post data, and that's excellent. But what you didn't have, perhaps, was the use of control groups or comparison groups. Some of you might be at moderate level already. And here, you've been able to get further along in telling the story about why your data and your successes is more valid than at the preliminary level. But what you can't do is say much about how it'll affect populations that are more generalized other than just the very specific people you're working with. So there's an issue of what now becomes external validity. And external validity is that ability to broadcast all the arenas where this ought to work and ought to work well. In other words, it's the issue when we're talking about taking something to scale and moving it beyond just a very narrow range of who benefits from the program. Strong evidence is the evidence that is both scientifically valid in the sense almost of the white rat story, and it is highly generalized. In other words, we have multiple kinds of comparison groups. We have multiple settings in which the program works well, and we have a lot of experience on using the programs and methods and the amount of treatment that you provide. One of the kinds of requirements we have is that all the subgrantees get at least to moderate by the end of the grant period. And we heard today, and it's best to put it that way, that we have a guarantee of 2 years. But we're hoping, of course, for the promised 5 years, even though they won't write that down because they don't know if it will, in fact, be available. In the 2 years, I presume it will be next to impossible to move someone from preliminary to strong. But I think working together, we can give everybody a decent shot at moderate within 2 years. And that's what we're hoping for. One of the things I wanted to put up there, just because this is sort of, they don't have a trademark, but this is the United Way slide. I mean, the United Way has this very standard logic model that you're very used to, I think. But here is where, in telling your story, we get a good sense of your ability to talk about how you understand what you do, how it works, what are your resources, and the resource we're adding, of course, and that you're matching is dollars. And then technical assistance in how to do a good job in accounting for the data that we'll generate. There's a sense in which all programs work. I mean, you do something and something happens. But we have to be able to document in what way it works and to what degree. And so it's going to be very important to see the outcomes. And impact here, to me, is long-term what happens. So the outcome is exactly what you were aiming for. Most of the kids are kindergarten ready, or most of the kids are reading proficient by grade 3. Excellent. That works. But the impact is 5 years down the road, how has that changed what's happening to those families? How does that impact what's happening in school? Well, one thing we do is defeat that too high graduating from high school, because we have them reading by 3. But in the short term, what we have is they are proficient. And that's terrific. And we want to be able to tell that story clearly on what you did and how much of it you have to do and how often they have to come back. And that's what the issue is around all the evidence. So the increasing strength of evaluation data is the wrong label for that. This is a logic model. This is how what you propose to do works. Preliminary data, you have a reasonable hypothesis. It's based on research findings, your own or someone else's. And we're missing comparison of control groups. this is a story you can read, but it's just, you know, the tutoring thing. The kids do better when you tutor them. Everybody happy, they love it. That's not very good data. I never have to ask again in a professional development workshop if the people liked it. I can draw the curve now. And I usually put that slide in there. They suppress a lot of my humor. Moderate level, again, repeat. It supports causal conclusions, but the studies are conducted in limited settings. It doesn't generalize well, but we're there. There's some jargony kinds of designs down at the bottom bullet, but those are the ways, those are the names that we call them, where we find ways of matching groups to the treated group. And so the hardest way and the most expensive way is, of course, a randomized control study. But that's really hard to achieve in a school setting and in most other community settings, but it can be done. And there's a moderate story. Strong level, it supports causal conclusions. That is, we've defeated almost every counterfactual possible. The only difference between the kids who received the treatment and the kids who are in the control group is that the kids in the treatment got your exciting program, and the kids in the control group got whatever they get at John Hay Elementary School. That one was safe because they tore it down, and I went there. And it's strong again because of the range of settings that it's been conducted in. It can be applied more broadly. There's more faith in it working broadly. There's another story. This last slide is really not much import now because we're going to get a very strong conversation about how the application is going to work. But essentially, you're going to be uploading your documentation that will help you tell your story about your enthusiasm for doing these important experimental studies. And you don't think about your work as experimental studies, but that in fact is what we're asking you to join in. And it's a grand experiment, and it's going to be a very large experiment. I like this second bullet point. The RFP review process will include evaluation experts. We're not going to let any other experts on the panel. I don't work well with others. And of course, from the evaluation side, none of that's true. I just get off messages. It's hard for me. We're going to look very carefully at both your willingness to undertake the hard work of evaluation, the capacity in your organization to do it, and the likelihood that you will work well together. And as I say, I'm not the only evaluator. There'll be 3 or 4 other colleagues of mine doing it. That will work well to get a good evaluation plan, and then 2 years of good evaluation practice. It's not as simple as your evaluation plan being approved by an evaluation expert who will go nameless. Your evaluation plans will have to be approved in Washington. So we'll be working on the iteration of the plan together. And you won't be doing that on your own. It'll be an important part of what we assist you with. And it is a rigorous process, but they want rigorous outcomes, and they want rigorous data. So they are watching very carefully, and it's not just up to us. We'll be working together. It'll be approved in Washington. And of course, I said it last time, and it's not a joke, but they won't approve it the first time. If we come back again, we have to make it better. But it's going to be, I think, a very exciting process. So thank you very much, and I'll be here for questions after the main body of presentation.
Okay. Thank you. So before I turn it over to Elise, I just want to say that due to the rigorous nature of the evaluation, that is a cost that we are actually working on here at Greater Twin Cities United Way. you'll see when you dig into the RFP and start crafting your own budget that we are looking that you allocate a specific part of your budget to training and capacity building and technical assistance, not only related to evaluation, but to other factors that will come up with Social Innovation Fund. But know that United Way is working in partnership with CARI and with Generation Next to assume most of the costs related to evaluation. There are 2 levels of evaluation. Again, it's that portfolio level, meaning all of you come together and we have an overall evaluation plan for the portfolio of subgrantees. And then Michael and team will be working with you individually to develop an evaluation plan. And those plans ultimately are approved by the Corporation of National Community Service because, as you might imagine, they're very interested in understanding the local impact of each program as well. So it all ties together, but know that that we're working on the budget components of that. So with that, I will turn it over to Elise Wiener, who is working on all things compliance, and will give us a nice overview of that.
Okay, good morning. Now, you've gotten a lot of good stuff about programs and evidence, all the fun stuff. I get to talk about compliance, financial and program. Do we have any financial people here? Financial support people? Only one. Well, everybody here needs to go back to your offices and tell the financial people that they need to get involved in putting this RFP together. There's 2 key elements to the compliance side with the SIF grant. One is the important aspect of the program responsibility, being able to document, as Michael was indicating, the evidence and the data and support for your outcomes and your impact. The other side, of course, because this is a federal grant, it is the fiscal responsibility. And with the federal dollar, there's lots of reporting and compliance aspects that everybody will have to adhere to. The aspects of compliance that we are having to comply with are similar to what the subgrantees will have to comply with. So it's kind of a roll-down theory. If you look on the website, when you get to applying at the RFP, there is a notice of funding availability and some frequently asked questions out there from the Corporation for National Community Service. And all their rules and regulations apply to us, and the same rules and regulations apply to the subgrantees as far as from this aspect. So the corporation has laid out what they see as highly effective financial characteristics of our subgrantees, of the intermediary and subgrantees. Policies and procedures, they will be looking for documentation and on policies and procedures, updated, reviewed periodically. Qualified, trained financial staff that understand how these procedures work. The reporting and the timeliness of that reporting is very important. They look at the organizations from a planning and cross-training aspect, so that if your individual that is doing reporting and asking for reimbursement for funding, if they are gone for a period of time, you have somebody in line that can do that same reporting, because there are no extensions. This is the federal government, but in this aspect there are no extensions. It doesn't work like tax law. And they're looking for self-assessment, continuous improvement. We'll be working with our subgrantees as we develop policies and procedures and documentation, reporting formats, and that sort of thing. We'll be working hand in hand with you to make sure that you're complying with what we need in order to be able to report to the corporation. And one of the aspects that they feel is very important is that your board and your finance committee are giving you full support for this program, because it is, as Michael mentioned, rigorous. evaluation, rigorous evidence, rigorous reporting, rigorous compliance. And you really do need your board and your finance committee on board with that whole aspect. Okay. The accounting system, you need to be able to track your expenses against grant and non-grant dollars. If you are involved with other federal grants, we need this grant, of course, tracked completely separate from the others. And you'll be tracking costs by the program year. So Megan mentioned we'll be working with you as far as the program timing and that sort of thing. You'll have to be able to track those costs based on the annual year from April 1 to March 31, for instance, because that's when the agreement rolls out initially. There are specific budget categories that you'll be providing information to us in the RFP. Standardized costs that we've listed that you'll be working against that budget on a quarterly basis and reporting basis for reimbursement. And then differentiating between the direct and indirect costs and making sure that we've got documentation for anything that you're being reimbursed for. Of course, federal grants have lots of guidelines, and depending on where you sit in one of these tiers will be the guidelines that you'll have to adhere to. The main one, of course, is the audit requirement for all institutions. The A133 audit requirement if you are expending more than $500,000 in federal dollars. And that you have to look at an organization standpoint. And then the basics of all those circulars are cost, administrative, and then the A133. So this is just a very high level. This is what we're going to be looking for as far as compliance from a federal standpoint. The cost principles, they provide you guidance as far as allowable costs, unallowable costs. The federal government wants you to make sure that they are bearing the fair share of their costs. In this case, they want us to bear the cost, not necessarily a federal grant. They encourage consistency of treatment of costs, guidance and on the selected items, and the mainstay is that costs must be allowable, reasonable, eligible, and necessary to the federal grant or to the federal program that you're applying to. The administrative principles, the A110, the old A110 principles, basically just provide consistency as far as how the federal government deals with us as grantees and in the management and agreements. We have an agreement with the corporation as far as how we are going to handle these grants. We will also have agreements with our sub-grantees so that you know what your steps are, what your requirements are, what you need to be doing. And then the A133, as I mentioned, extending more than $500,000. The SIF grant is titled under CSDA 94019. You can take that back to your finance people and they can find out what you need to actually comply with as far as the OMB circulars. So then the RFP for budget considerations. The minimum award, as Megan mentioned, is $100,000 per year for 2 years, which could be more depending on the sub-grantees that are selected and that sort of thing. We will need you to submit a budget. There's a template that you'll be working on. It's an Excel spreadsheet that you'll be submitting a budget for year 1 and year 2. It's laid out. There's 2 separate sections, and there are standard budget categories on that template. You can enter in specific line items to explain what expenses are under salary and benefits or contracting, consulting, other expenses. But we do need you to stay within standard categories if at all possible. As Megan mentioned, we need you to include 3 to 5% of the budget as an evaluation component. So if you are asking for $100,000, make sure you've got 3 to 5% included, probably in your contracting, consulting, or salary if you've got an evaluator on staff, in that section that we can see that you've included that 3 to 5%. And then criminal background check. In this case, the SIF requires a 3-part criminal background check for any individual dealing with vulnerable populations. And it includes the FBI fingerprint check, state criminal history check, and the national sex offender check. And for the corporation, there are no exceptions to these background checks, and the checks need to happen after you are awarded the grant. So in one of our info sessions, we had somebody ask, well, I've already gone through a background check. If I get the grant, do I have to go through it again? Yes, you do. You have to go through it again. And there's more information on the website as far as the criminal history background check. It's very in-depth. At the orientation sessions that we had out in DC with the corporation, they spent hours talking about criminal background checks. So they are serious about criminal background checks. Megan and I passed. Let's see, and Michael. So along with the budget template that you'll be filling out, the we're requesting a budget narrative, just explaining how the costs that you've listed will support the program. We prefer not to have any miscellaneous items as far as your description, and make sure that your costs are all allowable and based on the regulations and the OMB circulars. And that's where the OMB circulars come in handy. They've got a list of the basic costs that are allowable, and it also explains, for instance, fundraising for the match. That cost would not be allowable. That fundraising is not allowable on federal funding. And as Megan mentioned, sub-granting is not allowed, but contracting is. So, then important aspect of this grant is the match requirement, a 1-to-1 cash match. Cash, when I say cash, cash only, no in kind. You cannot repurpose dollars that you have already dedicated to a program or some other purpose. They're looking to expand, it's part of scalability, trying to expand their attack on, in this case, the education gap. And that's where they want new funding or uncommitted reserves. So if you have, and for your financial people, if you have uncommitted, unrestricted reserves on your balance sheet that you would like to purpose for this grant, you can use those dollars as long as the board agrees. We would have to have a board letter of commitment that they're allowing the use of the reserves. And as I indicated, no previously obligated or committed funds, and it cannot be federal funding indirectly or directly as far as the match. So if you are getting dollars from the state that originated from a federal grant, we cannot use that as a match. There cannot be any line to the federal government. And no in-kind match laws. So the grants management, as Megan mentioned, for United Way grantors or grantees that we have on board right now, this is going to be a little bit different. It will be on a reimbursement basis. Monthly invoicing will be encouraged, just so that you can keep your cash flow moving. And we will need a supporting document for every dollar that you're asking for reimbursement for. The funding awards roll out on April 1st. If your program gets up and running in April, I would expect that you would submit an invoice for reimbursement in May, for instance, and then we would reimburse you. And then we get reimbursement from the Fed because we don't get dollars ahead of time either. It has to be on total reimbursement basis. Again, the costs that you're asking for reimbursement have to be allowable under the federal rules. Any staff that you're assigning to this grant, you will need to have time and effort reporting. The timesheet reporting is very important. Make sure that it's complete, it's timely, the employee has signed off, and a supervisor with knowledge of the program has signed off. And then one of the fun parts of this grant is that you have dollars that you are getting from us, the sub-grant, and then you have a match share, which you are rolling into this program. We need reporting separately based for both the grant and the match piece. So it's a little bit of paperwork, and a lot of systems can't handle, accounting systems can't handle that. So we'll be working with you as far as trying to put together some reporting mechanisms, depending on your accounting system, so that we can get the appropriate separation of the expenses from the sub-grant versus the match piece. Because we then take that information, roll it up. We have to report 4 pools to the corporation. Their federal grant to us, our match, your grant, and your match. So we've got 4 pieces that we have to roll up and report to the corporation. So that's basically why we need that reported separately. And so now Michael can do some online.
We're going to pause for questions. Yes, so we are going to take some Q&A time before we move into the application component. And Molly, wave your hand, Molly, and Naomi have microphones. And because we are doing this online, we do need you to state your question into the microphone, so be patient with us. Otherwise, people who are on webinar just hear this big blank nothing, which is really annoying for them. So we're trying to be accommodating of that as well. One thing I just want to say in regards to Elise's segment of the presentation, for non-finance people, I was also having a little bit of heart palpitations up here about the requirements. So we understand. I am thankful every day that I have Elise in my life because she's making this run very smoothly. We will be working with the sub-grantees that we ultimately partner with to set up the right systems and set you up for success. So I just want to reiterate that. Elise is part of the review dream team along with Michael and the other Michael as well. So we'll be having these conversations as we go along. So I just want to make sure that that's clear for all of you who may be a little bit stressing out about the financial component. So this is the part where we pause and answer any questions that we may have. So it looks like we have one over here. Okay.
Good morning. My question is, I'm trying to understand the match. So if you're like in a typical situation where you have a program budget where the income matches expenses, any money that you have earmarked for that program cannot be used for the match. It has to be some other money like general operating, loading out here, or reserves. Am I correct on that? Like if you had, let's say you had a grant, and this is not going to be happen because Ignite doesn't even do youth programs anymore, but let's say you had a $50,000 grant from Ignite for your youth program. Because that's already earmarked for your youth program, you can't match it with these funds. Am I correct?
That is correct. You have to have new funding as support of your match. Now, again, I just want to reiterate that we're looking for commitment of that match by January 11th, at least 50%. So it could be a commitment letter from a funder saying, if X organization is awarded this grant, we will give them X number of dollars towards their matching component. But it cannot be currently allocated funding in any way. Reserves, that's okay. You can use your reserves for this, but it definitely has to be new cash match. Naomi?
Maybe all of our questions are going to be about this match. My question is new as of when? Is it new as of when we submit the grant, or is it new as of April? You know, for example, if something that we've been just awarded this month, if that counts as new. And my second question is, does the match all need to come from the lead organization, or can it come from a collective of whatever partnership you're applying for?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, if you're getting funding this month, as long as it's designated for the matching purpose of the Social Innovation Fund, it cannot be allocated or designated towards any other project. It has to be the cash match dedicated to the Social Innovation Fund. That's fine. That can count towards that. And then we expect that people who are applying for this will have matching funds coming in from multiple sources, right? So that's up to you to have that funnel through your organization to count as that match. Elise, anything you'd add to that? Okay.
Good morning. I have several questions, and I assume that there'll be a way to do it after this so that we have lots of time for lots of different people to ask questions.
Yes, and
right?
just to get at that point, if you do have questions that don't get answered today or you need to process something, you can email all questions to SIF for Social Innovation Fund, SIF@unitedwaytwincities.org, and that's also on our website that we'll be sharing later. So thank you for reminding.
So I'm going to just ask sort of two questions that I know you won't be able to give us an absolute definitive answer, but obviously in many different ways this is a huge amount of work. And I'm looking for some way to sort out the possibilities, the chances that my organization should spend time on it. One of them is it realistic that a program design that's submitted that's in the preliminary evaluation category, but would really like to have all the evaluations to move into the next one, would really be considered? Or are you going to have a preference for folks that already are pretty close to the middle level and can solidify that and move on?
So my overall recommendation is definitely read through all of the materials to make sure that you're hitting all of the requirements above and beyond just the evaluation piece of that. Okay. So that would be first. Make sure you're very familiar with all of the materials. Okay. Part two of that is the baseline requirement for evidence is really preliminary. So until we get in the applications and understand who's applying and what their levels of evidence are for their program, we don't know. So it's as long as you feel comfortable and confident that you have preliminary levels of evidence and that you're meeting all those other requirements for the Social Innovation Fund, that's up to you as an organization to determine whether or not you should apply.
And the second one then has to do with, again, some help in judging if we are not Minneapolis Public Schools or St. Paul Public Schools, is it really worth all this work?
So again, we don't have a bias or a leaning towards either Minneapolis or St. Paul Public Schools. I have no idea whether or not those districts are planning on applying. So what I would recommend again is if you feel like you have the right criteria met and a killer program that would get at the needs of the Social Innovation Fund, by all means apply. We really are looking for interesting, innovative programs with those levels of evidence and ability to take it to the next level to apply in the Social Innovation Fund. So I think we have a couple of questions online.
The first one is, how would United Way like us to demonstrate our core competence in the areas they'd like us, ask of us? For example, youth development.
So this goes back to the point that we made around we're looking for youth development organizations or folks who have that core competency. And you'll see that actually outlined in the RFP in terms of what we're looking for youth development and what that means in terms of what your organization should look like. And we're looking for the page number on that. But we do talk about your organization and kind of the key criteria. Yes, so on page 9 is where you'll see the goals, but then we do get into, bear with me for a second. Thank you. Page 26 is where we talk about the organizational capacity and what we're looking for. So those next few pages will really tell you what we're looking for in terms of that. But if you are a youth development organization or if this is your core competency, you should be able to tell that story of how you're actually meeting the needs of a youth development program. So tell your story to us, and there's room to do that within the application. one more from online?
Yep, one last one. Much of the evaluation discussed has been quantitative evaluation methods. Many communities that we work with that are low income come with an understanding of how they evaluate their work that is qualitative in nature. Will evaluator reviewers take account for cross-cultural approaches to evaluation, including will they have expertise in this area?
I alluded to it briefly, but yes, we're going to be very conscious of the cultural competence needed in evaluation. But that doesn't devolve into not producing moderate or strong evidence. And that means numbers. And it will go hand in hand with other kinds of evaluation, but there is simply no way that we will be able to get an evaluation plan approved that doesn't face that issue squarely. I hope that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I would add to that too, again, we will be working with individual sub-grantees who are ultimately selected to make sure that we're developing the right plans. And as Michael builds his team that will be working on developing this, we'll have issues like that taken into consideration.
I believe you touched on it, but this is always an interesting question to me. Exactly how are you going to measure cultural competency? That's always an interesting dynamic to me when that term is thrown out there. So that, and I understand the part of what you said, but I'd like a little bit more elaboration.
Microphone, Naomi, can you bring the microphone over?
I don't want any misunderstanding. I'm not measuring cultural competence. Not on my side and not on the program side. My sense is that the evaluation is sensitive to cultural issues and how organizations are running their programs and in ways that make them very effective. I'm making a claim that as evaluators at Carey, we know that we have to become culturally competent in dealing outside of more than a page of numbers. That Elise and I like, and I think Naomi likes numbers too. But that's what I meant, and I hope I didn't misspeak.
I'll add from that perspective also, there are parts within the RFP and then within the application where you as an organization and a program describe your own ability around cultural competency, and that's a point of discussion that we'll be having for our subgrantees or potential subgrantees during the actual review process. But Michael is right from an evaluation standpoint. While that lens is very important to us, we will be delivering against numbers for this. So it's two separate pieces.
I have a question about the evaluation. We are currently involved in a federal grant, and we're also selected as one of 5 to be studied for our responsible fathering program. So we are doing that, the control group, the random selection, that sort of thing. It's rigorous, as you said. And in doing so, we have also had to dedicate quite a lot of funds to extra recruiting, incentives, all those kinds of things. Is that something we should think about as we look at evaluation costs, or is that something you will be handling? Yeah. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, there's cost to those things too, which are not program, and then you've got that control group too that you'll be following outside of our program group. You know what I'm talking about. So who's paying for that? Microphone.
I think I follow you very well. Certainly, one thing that evaluation won't do is pay incentives. That is not an evaluation cost. It's a built-in cost in running a program design, for sure. But having said it so boldly, now I'll take it back a little bit, and the right answer was probably more like, we'll see. Because even when we're doing our best external, neutral evaluation, every once in a while we bribe people with gift cards to Target, gift cards to Amazon, gift cards to wherever that's right. So I'm not ruling it out entirely, but the difficulty in answering some of these questions is that there's no proposal in front of us, and I don't know the work and the populations and the kinds of measures that we'll be going after and what it might take to get good comparison groups. And if there has to be some kind of incentivization, and you usually do it, so that can well then come into the funded evaluation outside of your organization. But that's part of, I think, the back and forth on how it'll be developed.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'm looking at Elise to see if it's raising any concerns from our, okay.
So our organization works across these goal areas, and I'm just curious, is there a preference to focus on one goal area or really to have a wide focus? So kind of narrow in one, say kindergarten readiness, or a wider focus?
So it's a really good question. The way that it's laid out in the RFP is that we want you to address one or more of the priority goals. What I would take as an approach, remembering that it's highly competitive, it's open to a wide array of different types of organizations, not just 501c3s. If you feel like you have a really strong program that would span a couple of the goals, so Michael did a nice job of laying out those networks that he talked about that tick off a couple of the goals in one network. If it makes sense as a comprehensive program, submit a proposal. If you feel like you have strong programs in two different goal areas, I would consider, and I would weigh all of the different criteria and make sure that you feel that it would be very competitive, I would consider submitting separate proposals if they're two different programs. So it's really up to you as an organization. We don't have preference given within our kind of scoring and criteria around one or more. It's really about who are the programs of the organizations that are really meeting the needs of the comprehensive needs of the Social Innovation Fund. So it's up to you. Do we have another question over here? Go ahead.
I have a question for you, I think, Elise. Because we're bringing cash match to bear, and the OMB circulars would not allow certain expenditures under the money that's coming through this, can we use the cash match to spend on things that the OMB would not allow?
The cash match, your match and the dollars that we are granting out have to be spent based on the OMB circular. So if it's not allowed under OMB circular, you can't spend the cash match on it.
It's a really good question. That will be going up in the FAQ. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm wondering about the FBI background checks, and wondering if you could speak a little more to if that applies to all staff working in the organization, working in the agencies involved in the partnership, or if that applies specifically to staff whose salary is being paid for through the fund.
So I'm going to oversimplify this, and then Elise, you can jump in and correct me. So it's anyone who is being paid under this particular grant, and it's anyone who comes into direct contact with vulnerable populations as part of your grant proposal, right? So that may or may not be part of the salary, but if you're working in a Beacons program and it's part of the Social Innovation Fund grant, and I'm coming into contact with kids, I would need to go through that 3-tiered background check as part of that as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So for example, I'm probably not going to be doing direct service, but I did go through the background check because part of my salary is allocated towards the implementation of the Social Innovation Fund. Elisa's as well, she was fingerprinted. Michael was also fingerprinted. And then ultimately, for you and your program, the folks actually doing the direct service would need to get fingerprinted, and that thorough background check. So it's that 3 tiers again. And we will, for our sub-grantees that we ultimately select, we'll do some comprehensive educating around that so that we're all on the same page, because it is very detailed. And I failed, what, twice? My prints were bad twice for some reason. Yeah, so it's something we'll walk through so that everybody's clear. Yeah. Microphone, please.
Just as a follow-up to Jenny's question, I was wondering if we can include expenses in the budget to support paying for those background checks?
The answer is yes.
I'd like to go back to the question that came via the computer about qualitative versus quantitative. And it deals, in my opinion, with culture. I won't say cultural competence, because if you are an organization that through your history have dealt with your programs more in a qualitative way than quantitative, and you've had success that maybe you haven't measured in quite the quantitative way, but more qualitatively. But now suddenly there's this shift, which, and this DRIVE program is something that you would be a fool not to want to get on board with. However, there's an issue here, and this is the issue, and I'm going to try to say it in a way that, I don't know, I'm going to try not to offend anyone, but usually I do. This is okay. If we're an organization or a program 25 years old that has done very well with low-income populations that don't do as well in school because of the lack of cultural competence in some schools, and I'm going to go way back to the 60s when schools were torn down in South Minneapolis to desegregate. And what happened was, and I was one of them, went to schools that had white teachers that didn't believe we could learn, and so therefore did not engage us. You know, at the black school I went to, which was Warrington, the teachers, many of whom were black, had a higher expectation. And so if it were measured quantitatively, I'm sure the data would have shown that high expectations can equal high success. But anyway, getting up to today, we would love to get on board at the organization I work for with some of this. I know that there's this big movement towards this, and I can't put it into words, but read your RPs and you'll know what I'm talking about. The only thing that we're lacking is the ability to turn our qualitative data into quantitative data, and we're not able to show that in our proposal, because that's something Wilder Foundation is still kind of helping us up the learning curve with. Are you willing? I mean, if we're doing everything else, then we can identify best practices that we have developed basically on our own, but that you can match. I think any program that's successful, if you search hard enough, you can find evidence-based practices that are in alignment. But we just need help making that turn. Is that something that you would identify in the proposal evaluation process, if that's where we were lacking?
So I'm actually going to turn that question over to Michael Gore, because I think we're talking about two different issues here.
So let me just briefly describe work of Generation Next, and maybe that in that context, maybe we'll be able to answer some of your questions. I think it's crucial as we kind of move forward, as I stated earlier, our work in Generation Next will be replicating successful model. And how do you replicate successful model? It has to be driven by data, right? So I know there will be many of you here with a lot of anecdotal evidence. I know because it worked, because I know it works. I understand that and I appreciate that, and there's a qualitative aspect of it. If you need assistance in terms of converting qualitative to more quantitative, that's a separate conversation piece. And I don't think that we are in a position in SIF-wise to convert that. However, you will have an opportunity to confer with us in terms of Generation Next. And that's exactly what we're talking about in Generation Next. We want to make sure, as you as a provider, and getting resources from funders are asking for greater level of accountability. I would say students are asking for greater level of accountability in light of our gaps that I spoke earlier. Hence, our work in Generation Next would be to replicate successful model. If you're able to demonstrate your model works, in terms of helping narrow the gap. And obviously, we're talking about 5 academic goals. However, we know there are other goals that are non-academic that have to be integrated in order for our students to be successful, right? Be it cultural relevancy, cultural competency, teacher, all other aspects of the measure as well. So to a degree, I think it is important for you to know that I think we understand the issues of qualitative, but it is more important that we will begin to assist you in terms of Generation Next. Fifth is looking for hard data, as Michael mentioned earlier, with evidence and in replicating, and we will begin to work with you in terms of Generation Next. That being said, once again, we have a 500 separate initiatives with the best intentions, with the big hearts that you guys have, with the students in mind. But what we're doing right now is not working, and we're looking for models that work, identified data-wise, and we want to scale it and sustain it in the long term.
Thank you. Holly?
Hi, I have a question regarding data collection. I'm wondering if there will be some sort of database that will be coming down the pipeline for this, because I can only imagine that as part of the evaluation you'll be needing to track some of those data over a period of time.
So we're exploring that right now, and that's certainly a goal of Generation Next, is to have an overarching database that will collect community-wide data, but we also are waiting to see who we have in our portfolio, what currently exists, what needs those individuals will have, because as I mentioned, we're having up to 8 sub-grantees, which is not a huge amount, but that's something that we'll work through as we develop plans and figure that out. But obviously data is central to this, so we'll be exploring that. Good question.
This question is about the partnership statement that applicants must demonstrate the formal with Minneapolis-St. Paul Public Schools and or partner charter schools. Do you mean their partner charter schools or any charter schools?
Charter schools that you may be partnering with as part of this, right? So it's working with kids in the urban core of Minneapolis and St. Paul. If you're working with the charters versus the districts on your actual program that you're proposing, you want to make sure that you're partnering officially with that charter or group of charters in that way. So that's what that's getting at. Good question. Any other burning questions before we move on to the application component? And we will have time at the end as well if you're thinking about something or if something comes to mind. Okay, so I will turn it over to the third Michael of the morning. Yeah.
All right. So my name is Michael Grace. I'm with Information Services here at the Greater Twin Cities United Way, or IT department, and I'm the web project manager. So I'm going to be showing you the online system, certainly not the most important, certainly not the most interesting part of the session, but certainly very important if you do go forward and make application. Just quick show of hands, how many people in the room have seen our new system? As of March, maybe if you applied in the hunger or healthy behaviors areas. Okay. So we have a new system as of March, like I said. We have named it Impact Link, that is new. So if you hear the term Impact Link, this is the term that we have designated for this new system. Again, here's some dates, the training for today and tomorrow. With this application due date of January 11th at noon, I want to make sure everyone does see that noon due date, due time. We will certainly be available that day. We'll prioritize staff availability to troubleshoot any last-minute issues. They always occur. That day, we do ask that you make sure that you are set up and working on that application, so we eliminate as much of that last-minute troubleshooting as possible. This is kind of a one-stop shop for you for all things related to SIF. I'll be showing you this website in just a moment. UnitedWayTwinCities.org/SIF, SIF, as Megan has mentioned, is a place you can go to download a lot of the documents we've talked about today and also get links to log on to the system. Resources that are available to you in your packets. This PowerPoint is available to you. Some online instructions for the system. Note that things may look a little bit different. This is kind of a unique opportunity for us at the United Way, and accordingly, there are some parts of the application system that have been modified slightly. for the SIF RFP. Additionally, there is a service level agreement document in your packet. Our service level agreement with you kind of outlines the availability we have to troubleshoot technical problems, our hours, which are 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., and kind of the level of assistance we're able to provide. We understand that all of you come from organizations of varying size. Some of you have robust IT departments and some of you do not. We will work with you to the extent we can to troubleshoot issues that are preventing you from successfully completing your application. There are some things that will be specific to your environment which we won't be able to assist you with, and some of that is outlined in the SLA. Very important contact information for the help desk. All technical problems that you may have need to be directed to the help desk. I want to draw this distinction between technical and content questions. Certainly anything that's related to the RFP itself, how you should answer a specific question, definitions that are contained that are in the RFP or the application. That email address sif@unitedwaytwincities.org. Megan's kind of maintaining that email account. So any questions related to content can best be answered by Megan and her team. Anything that's really specific to the technical piece, whether it's a password issue or error message you're receiving, the help desk we may help you with that. Probably best is actually email support@unitedwaytwincities.org. Kind of gets the process initiated for solving that problem for you. We also have a phone number for you as well, 612-340-7534. One thing that isn't new about our Impact Link system is we do ask you to set up unique logins for each staff person. I'll be showing you how to request account in just a moment. There's the agency dashboard, which I will be showing you. And we'll also be showing you the individual sub-site for the SIF RFP. So because you will be using unique logins for each individual involved in the application, we ask you kind of think ahead of time about who might need access to that application. For example, one person may work on the narrative questions, another person may put in some of the financial or demographic information. If you kind of think ahead of time about who will need access, so when you go to request an account, you can think about those people as well. One thing I will mention, if you have applied for, either applied for funding or completed reporting requirements in this new system, again, anything that's occurred since March, that same username password will work for accessing the system. It is the same system. But if you have not been in the system, again, March is kind of the date, you will need to sign up for an account. Supported browsers. I'm a web developer. I use Apple computers a lot. In this case, we are using a Microsoft product. And for that reason, I'm really going to strongly encourage you to use Internet Explorer or Firefox when you're completing this application. Internet Explorer will only be available to you if you're using a Windows operating system computer. If you are using OS X and an Apple computer, that's fine. Strongly encourage you to use Firefox instead of Chrome or Safari, which are some other popular browsers you may be using. These browsers, you'll be able to log in and get through the application. What happens is it doesn't render the pages. The styling gets kind of goofed up, and that's what we're trying to prevent. So Firefox is a free browser. It's available to you. We can certainly provide you download information if you need it. But we really strongly encourage you, if you're using an Apple computer, to use Firefox, and if you're using a Windows computer, to use Internet Explorer. Okay. So the URL, I'll be showing you this in just a moment. The URL for requesting a user account is unitedwaytwincities.org/request-user-account. Resetting your password. I'm going to be showing this page as well momentarily. This is a self-service password reset option that's available to you. This is actually kind of a quick and easy way to see whether you have an account set up in the system. When you go to the login system, the URL for which I'll provide you in just a moment, you can click on Forgot Username/Password. Type in your username, which is your email address, and click Reset Password. The system will generate a new password for you and send it to you at the email address that you indicated. If you don't have an account set up, it will give you an error message that looks like this, indicating that you're not a valid user in the system. So again, this is kind of a quick and easy way to check to see whether you are set up with an account. Okay, so here is the URL that you need. There's a link to this on the SIF webpage, which I'll show you in just a second here. But it is https://grantproposal.unitedwaytwincities.org. Show you this. We'll go into the live system in just a moment here. I'm going to breeze through these. Again, these slides provide for your reference. I'm not going to take the time to go through them now, with the exception of this slide here. This is an important limitation of the system that I need everyone to be aware of. The system doesn't handle what's called concurrency well. It doesn't do version control. And what that means is that it's possible for two people working on the same application at the same time to overwrite each other's changes. So I'll repeat that. The system will not prevent two people working on the same application at the same time from overwriting each other's changes. You will not get an alert saying that another person has the application open, and you won't be asked whether you want to overwrite their changes. So you need to coordinate within your team to make sure that that doesn't happen. This is a fictitious scenario I've set up to illustrate this point. So if Susan were to open the application at 8:07, begin her work, and Carl were to open it at 8:14, when Susan goes to save at 8:24, leaves the system, Carl will overwrite all of her changes when he saves at 8:38. So I'm not happy with it, but it's a limitation of the system we're trying to address. So it's something you need to be mindful of locally. Yep. Right. So you can't rely on the system to coordinate actually the application. So you need to work as a team so that only one of you are working on the application at any given time. Yeah.
If you're working on different sections.
They will overwrite the entire application. So a blank field will overwrite a field with content. Sure. The question is, what if, it's an excellent question. Thanks for asking it. The question is, what if you're working on different sections of the application? Unfortunately, the way that the technology is set up, the form is treated as a single file, and a blank field will overwrite any content in a different section that someone else is working on. All right, so we are going to go into the system itself. Before I do that, I want to take you to this page that Megan and I have now mentioned. Again, this is www.unitedwaytwincities.org/SIF, S-I-F. And it's going to redirect you to a longer URL that we don't need you to remember. This is your one-stop shop for everything SIF. A lot of background information. One thing I want to show you is this frequently asked questions section. On the left nav here, you'll see this FAQs link. When you click on that, it'll take you to a page we've set up. Right now it's a little sparse. We're going to be updating this very frequently throughout the application period. So I invite you to bookmark this and check it regularly. It will answer some of the more frequently asked questions that we receive as categorized by common categories. Go back to the SIF page. All right. So again, a lot of information here. Overview of the key dates. At this point, the RFP is live. I published it at 9 a.m. this morning, so it's available to you at the bottom of this page and in the grant system, which will impact link, which I'll show you momentarily. At this point, the most important date for you to be aware of, again, is this January 11th at noon Central Time, when the application period will close. RFP document, the guidelines document is available right here. So under the heading of RFP guidelines document, there's a link to a PDF, which is an electronic version of what I understand you have in your packet there.
And Michael, while that's coming up, one thing that I'll add that we'll be adding to this website later this morning is a document so you can print out the application. So it's just the questions that we're asking. So if it's helpful to share with your team so that you don't have to print out screenshots or anything like that within the link, this will give you a nice PDF of that application.
Okay, so before I go into the system, the one last thing I want to show you is the button that you need to press in order to pop up this little form in order to request access to the system. This is the account sign-up form. So again, at the bottom of the SIF page, there's a little button that says request a new user account. click that button. For each person requiring access, you can fill this out on their behalf, or you can ask them to fill it out. Click submit, and our staff will process that request and will get you access within 2 or 3 business days.
So just to reiterate that point, after you read the RFP and the application today and understand the supporting materials, if you're strongly thinking about applying for social innovation funds, please do take a moment today or very soon to click on that button to set up your account, because as Michael mentioned, it will take 2 to 3 business days to get that set up. So make sure that you pay attention to that component.
All right. So after you have received a temporary password in your email, that will be your indication that your account has been set up and you now have access to the Impact Link system. You are able to log in. There's a link right here to do that. Again, that URL is grantproposal.unitedwaytwincities.org, and there is a link under Application Documents on the 5th page. That will take you to a page that looks like this. Again, there's that forgot username and password self-service link here. If you do need to use that, certainly are capable of doing that, and we encourage you to do that if you need to reset your password. Your username is your email address, and your password for when you first go in to log in, your password will be the system-generated password that you received in your email. Once you log in, you'll be taken to a screen that looks like this. This is the agency dashboard. Pretty straightforward. There's some announcements here related to past funding opportunities. The main thing you want to look for when you log in is this link right here. During the application period of today through January 11th, you will see the Generation Next Social Innovation Fund Initiative link. You want to go ahead and click that. And you'll be taken to a page that looks like this. This is what we refer to as the RFP subsite. So if you do call support and you hear me talking about the RFP subsite, this is the page that we are talking about here. This is the page where you will find documents that are needed for completing the application and a link to initiate your application. Megan, do you want to talk at all about these documents?
Yep, so as I mentioned earlier, what you'll see in here is additional resources. Now again, these are just recommended tools. You don't have to use these guidelines, but as you're filling out your application, both the document logic model as well as the theory of change tool, those documents will kind of guide you through what we're looking for in terms of filling out the application. So as I mentioned, we don't have the very prescriptive, here are the expected outcome indicators that you'll use. It's really all of you telling your story in terms of how you'll meet the end goal. So definitely use those documents, look through them, ask us questions if you have questions as you're filling this out, but those will be the resources that you have there. And then as I mentioned, you'll see both the PDF version of the RFP so that you can print that out and share it. And then there is also the budget template here that Elise mentioned earlier so that you can use that. And again, we will be uploading the application itself within a PDF form so that you can print that out, share it, divvy it up between your colleagues to figure out who's answering what. So use that as a resource and tool as well.
All right. So if you've decided to go ahead and make application once you get to this page, in order to initiate your application, you simply click on this big blue link that says Start a New Application, and that will open the application. So here it is. This is the application form that we will be asking you to fill out. There are some attachment fields, which I'll show you momentarily. Everything else needs to be filled out in the boxes available, pretty standard web form. First thing you'll need to do is provide your application a unique file name. We ask you to use the convention of agency name hyphen program name. You'll notice throughout the application form there are a number of save buttons that are kind of scattered, and that is because we encourage you to save very frequently. We don't want you to lose any information because of a browser crash or a local computer problem. And the best way to contend against that is by saving frequently. You do that by simply hitting any of these save buttons. Going on to part one, and Megan, feel free to jump in anything content.
So on eligibility, this is where we're going to ask you basic organizational questions to understand whether or not you actually qualify to apply for the Social Innovation Fund. And so it walks through things like on question number 1 around your status as a 501c3, or if you are a charitable organization, state or local government, et cetera. So you'll see that there. And then some key requirements of the actual RFP itself. Are you serving residents of Minneapolis and St. Paul? Are you serving low-income communities? Does your organization have core competency in one or more of the goal areas that we've outlined? So you'll read through these and tick off yes or no in terms of whether or not you're eligible to apply for Social Innovation Fund. So it's before you dig into the real nitty-gritty of applying for this fund to see if you qualify to start.
And after completing part 1, you go into part 2.
Yep, so in part 2, you're going to tell us, again, around more of organizational than programmatic at this point. We want to understand your organization, your mission, the history, your EIN number, if you have one, the year that you were established, your ED, the contact person. So again, details of the actual proposal will be fulfilled in this part. I see questions. Can we get a microphone?
You've talked about collaborations, and so is this information for the lead organization, the lead partner in the collaboration?
Yes, really good question, Karen. This would be for the lead applicant. We want to understand this. There's places later in the application where you can actually talk about the partnership and what that looks like. So good question. Molly, another question right here.
Can you cut and paste?
Yes, that is a possibility,
so
right?
the text fields themselves are what's called plain text, so it doesn't support any formatting, but you certainly can copy and paste. In fact, as we get into the narrative sections, we encourage you to actually write those narratives in Microsoft Word or word processing application and save them, and then copy and paste them when you're done. All right, so here are some first examples of attachment fields. There are a number of times where we will be asking you to attach documents. The format you should be using is PDF or maybe an image format like a JPEG or something if you need to. If you do need some assistance with that, again, we can provide some assistance. Your local IT should be able to help you with that. Be mindful of file attachment size. There are ways to get the file to a quality that is perfectly sufficient while keeping it low, so it's not going to take forever to upload. In fact, if it's too large, we're going to come problems with getting your application saved properly. So again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to our help desk. Your local IT resources can assist you with that.
One distinction I'll make here too, for those of you who are currently United Way funded and have provided these documents to us before for another grant, we actually need you to submit them again on behalf of this funding stream because of the federal regulations and the way that we're tracking. So I know that seems a little bit redundant, but we will need you to provide those here as well.
Again, you'll see these save buttons really scattered throughout the application form. We ask that you press those buttons frequently.
So when we're getting into the financial information here, you want to insert how much you're requesting annually. Again, you'll have the ability to tell the story about this on the actual budget form, the Excel spreadsheet that you'll see in here as well. We'll want to know at this point as well, from what sources have you obtained commitments for the required 50% cash match. So you'll list those folks out here. There is another section where you actually can upload their commitment from organizations within this process too. And then this is, it gets into capacity of organization as well. And this is where you start answering kind of the nitty-gritty questions around your organization's appetite to take on a federal grant, previous experience in doing this, systems that you have in place, staff that you have in place. So really providing us with some detailed information on how this would be managed from your side. And if it's something that you haven't done before, please tell us your willingness and desire to take on something like this within this segment and what systems you would put into place to make this happen. And we have a question. Can we get a microphone?
Yes, thanks. Just a couple of technical questions. So is it better to use something like Notepad and to create your narrative and not something like Word where you said there's no formatting? And the second question is, are there any character or other kinds of limits for narrative?
That's a great question. So in terms of formatting, you're going to want to probably have spell check, those typical features that you get out of a Microsoft Word when you're saving it and you're doing that initial work. Typically, it will not carry over any kind of special encoding or formatting code into the plain text when you copy and paste it from Word into this text box. So from that perspective, I would encourage you to use Word or whatever word processing application you use, and then simply eyeball what you've pasted. I mean, it's good just to kind of take a look at what you've pasted, make sure that it looks normal, you're not seeing any kind of weird characters or encoding. In terms of a character limit, there is no character limit enforced on the front end. What that means is in this box, you can put in a novel. And I think kind of from a content standpoint, Megan would encourage you not to do that, and I'll let her speak on that. But from a technology, from a strictly technical perspective, there is no character limit here. There's something, there is a limitation that it's which I'll actually get to in a little bit. I'll address that momentarily.
The only thing I would add to that is that Michael is correct. We're not looking for a huge novel on this, but we certainly want all of you to have the ability to tell your story and to talk about what you're proposing efficiently and effectively within this.
So you'll notice that as you continue to put in content and text into these boxes, you will get a scroll bar, again, very typical of any kind of text box in a web form you've used. Do you have any specific comments on any questions? If you have any questions about terminology or what the question's asking, how you should answer it, that's where you would email sif@unitedwaytwincities.org.
One thing I will address on that front, scroll up just a little bit. The question is around describe your, pause, you're good. Describe your organization's capacity to raise matching funds over the next 2 years. This question has come up a lot from people over the last couple of weeks. We are just asking in the first year that you, again, demonstrate 50% commitment by January 11th, that you have full commitment by April 1st for year 1, and then you do full commitment again second year by April 1st. So we're not looking for 2 years of commitment or half of those 2 years on January 11th. So know that it's year by year by April 1st. So in part 5, we get into theory of change. So again, this goes back to the resources that we've provided to you within this application to really describe your program's theory of change and how you're planning on ultimately affecting the people that are receiving the services from your program. So this is where you start telling that story of your actual program. And then we'll want to know, too, as you scroll down, ways that your organization helps close the opportunity and achievement gap. So really this is talking about, you can give some organizational examples here, but we also want to know from a programmatic standpoint how you'll address this issue. We do ask for target populations and the number of individuals served. Naomi pointed out to me very astutely that we're looking for unique individuals served here. We're not, especially for those of you who are considering applying as a partnership, we'll want to understand that there's not duplication within those numbers. So please make sure to tell that story as well. Part 6, we start getting into the actual program overview. So this is where you're going to talk about your logic model and your actual program that you're planning on implementing and how it addresses the needs and the community goals. So this is where you can really kind of lay out what you're planning on doing with this funding, the pre-implementation phase, the actual implementation phase. What does the program look like? This is really where you want to tell your story within this section of what you're doing for the program. So as you go through these, you know, read through them carefully and let us know if you have questions as you go through. And then as we talked about, this collaboration component in part 2 of this is really talking about those relationships of any kind of collaborative. So this is saying if you're a lead applicant and you want to partner with other organizations, tell us in this section how you plan on doing that. What are the specific roles of each partner? Who's the fiscal agent? How will that play out within the community? This is really where you want to tell that. So again, take your time on this and really build that case for the in-depth partnerships that you're proposing. There's also questions in here around scaling, so talking about that scaling component. That'll be an important story to tell in this. And then ultimately, why will the Social Innovation Fund make a difference to your program? What will this money do that you can't do right now?
Some additional attachment fields.
Right, so we talked about those formal agreements that you have with your public schools or with your charters. This is where you would upload that. If you have a partnership with the city or both cities, this is where you would include that information as well. Then we get into the evidence and evaluation component. So that will be laid out nicely in the RFP, and this is where you're going to start talking about those levels of evidence and evaluation that you're using for your program. And what I will add here, and Michael made this distinction, but I'll repeat it, is that we are looking for programs to have at least preliminary model or preliminary levels of evidence, or you're using research evaluation of very similar programs to build that case. So that is another part of the story that you can tell of, you know, this is working somewhere else and this is why you want to do it. And here's the research and evaluations that you have at your fingertips that is telling that story. So make sure that you include that in here as well. And then we'll also want to know your own organization's appetite for performance measurement and management. So how are you thinking about evaluation? How are you looking at this? What is your ongoing approach to data collection and use of data? So make sure that you include those segments here too. And then as Michael mentioned, I think every section has some sort of document upload or close to all of them. You do have the opportunity to share some of the evaluations that you've done for your organization that you would like us to see. So there is a space here that you can include some of those evaluation documents, including recent findings or reports. You can also upload your theory of change here if you'd like to do that, or the logic model that you're using. So there's opportunities to tell the story through graphics that we don't have that capability through the text boxes. So know that you can include those documents here as well.
Okay. So as you can see, the application is narrative intensive. It's part of the reason why I encourage you, especially with this RFP, to do that work in a word processing application and then copy and paste it into the appropriate fields. We're getting into a non-narrative section, which is the demographic detail.
Great, so here's where you're going to enter your numbers for this. So total number of unique individuals that you're proposing in year 1 and year 2. We're going to want to know the income guidelines around this. Again, there's the poverty guidelines here, but we also do have a text box that has been included to describe how you collect data for your program as well. So you can expand upon that if you need to. That includes information like free and reduced lunch if that's how you collect as an example. Jenny? Microphone is right behind you.
I'm curious, since the idea is to take an existing program with some demonstrated effectiveness and grow it or take it to scale, when you think about these kinds of descriptions around our program strategy and specific numbers, are we reporting broadly on our overall efforts or specific to how we would utilize these grant funds? And can you talk a little bit about that?
So we're interested in specifically how you would use these funds as the program, for the program, to basically take it to scale. So you can definitely paint that picture in the overall context of what you're doing from an organizational standpoint, but we're very interested in the actual program and how that will be taken to scale. Does that answer your question?
Just to make sure, just to clarify that, so in the narrative we should really describe specifically how we would utilize the funds. When we're describing numbers, we should talk about the entire approach.
Well,
correct?
no, so you should talk about specific to SIF funds in the program that you're proposing, right? So I'm thinking, my mind is going to the why because you're asking the question, but if you told that whole story of numbers, that probably would not be the most accurate portrayal of what you're actually proposing. So there is, from an organizational standpoint, we want to understand some of the capacity issues, but from a programmatic standpoint, we really want to understand what you're applying for, what that design is, and what the SIF funds will contribute to. Thank you.
Hi, a question about the demographics form. Typically when we report income, it's related to the number of households. In this case, is it related to the number of individuals?
It's the number of individuals.
Okay, so one point I wanted to make here, yes, thank you, that's an important distinction. Previous forms have looked very similar to this. We do ask in terms of households. This is individuals. So for year 1 proposed, dates are provided there. And for year 2 proposed, we ask for a total number of clients you'll be serving. Let's make up some numbers here. And you will notice that after I've entered these numbers, there is red formatting, alert that pop up to indicate that these sums do not equal these values. So these values here are used as the kind of basis for comparison for all the individual kind of breakdown sums. And the expectation here is that as we ask you to break down the total number that you intend to serve, each kind of breakdown should sum up to the value that you indicate you would serve.
So one thing that I'll add in demographics also, so as you think about your partnerships and the schools that you'll be working with or the communities that you'll be working with, try to make sure that you have as close to as possible the demographic data, meaning income, meaning gender, meaning race, ethnicity. If we see a lot of unknowns in this area, that's a red flag for us that the program hasn't been developed fully enough. And given the competitiveness of this, that is something that can disqualify you from moving forward. So know that we really want you to think about this and insert that information. It's very important when it comes to the demographic component.
Another technical note, if you do see an NaN error, it's not a number. These boxes are expecting integers, they're expecting whole numbers, and they will not accept anything but that. If there is some reason why you need to qualify your information, you can use one of the text boxes, but the fields themselves are technically limited to integers.
This is pretty straightforward. Gender, age, breakdowns, race, ethnicity. Geographic information is really limited to Minneapolis and St. Paul. We do have county information for Hennepin and for Ramsey outside of both of those, and that's really just so that we can quantify the full scope of the program. Some of you may be delivering slightly outside of that. However, we do want to really stress that we're looking for programs that serve urban core of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And there is a text box here, too, if you need to provide us with further detail.
So then we get into the budget. And this is the one part where instead of entering data right directly into the form, you will be using an Excel template. And you can download it by clicking on this link. That will open an XLSX file. So if you have Microsoft Excel, that will certainly work. There are other spreadsheet applications that can work with this file format. Again, if you need help with any of these issues, we're available to help you. Otherwise, you should reach out to your local IT resources if you have them. I don't know much about this one.
So here's what I want to just walk through really quick. If you could click on the Introduction tab. That really just sets the stage to give you kind of the general scope of what you should be looking at. If you click on the Budget Definitions tab, that really breaks everything down. Elisa's done a really great job of providing that context. If you have questions there, refer back to that. If you still have questions, reach out to that email address at unitedwaycommunity.org and we'll respond. And then the budget is on tab 3 where you'll actually be entering in your numbers and information. And I think what I would like to stress most here is, again, for those of you who are currently United Way funded, this looks very different than our current budget. And we'll be digging into budget in a very different way than what you're used to from United Way. So as I mentioned, Elise is on the review team. She's part of the overall application process. We'll be having those conversations with all of you as we move into this. So make sure that you're reading that thoroughly, and we follow up on those numbers as well. So it's different in terms of what we've done before here.
So again, from a technology standpoint, the process will be you'll download this template. You'll need to save it locally, which means you'll have to save it to your My Documents folder or someplace on your computer. When you first download it, it will be in a read-only state. And you need to save it somewhere on your computer to be able to work on it. Once you're done, you simply upload it as an attachment, like any other file attachment, and you'll navigate to that location where you saved the file in order to upload it. Anything else? The letter of commitment 990.
Yep, so that's where you upload your letters of commitment for the match that you can demonstrate there. And then we also do want your most recent financial statement, including the A133 audit and most recent 990, if applicable. So that's where you would upload those things. And then also we do have the text box here for the budget narrative as well that will go along with the template that we just showed you, the Excel spreadsheet.
All right, there's a section for our budget narrative. You can provide additional context as needed. And finally, part 10 is for service delivery locations. This is for you to list all locations where you'll be providing services.
So we do want to know in this section where services will be delivered. So if your organization is headquartered somewhere but you're not delivering direct service there as part of the SIF grant, don't put that address in here. We really want to know where is program taking place. If you have multiple sites, you see a tab at the bottom left. Sorry, I'm probably stealing your thunder maybe a little bit, where you can add a location and add further locations. And is there a limit to that, Michael?
No.
Okay.
Previous system, I think there was, as I understand
Yes.
it. You can add additional locations as needed. If you do add one too many, you can remove it that way. Right to the bottom. You can leave them blank. It's not a big deal. One thing I will say about this, you can make sure you're putting accurate addresses here. We do use automated geolocating services that basically turn the address into longitude and latitude that we can use the map. So we ask that you do your best to put in accurate addresses. The computer's smart enough to figure out that AVE equals avenue, but if you totally misspell the street name, it's not going to be able to figure it out. So we ask that you do take time here to put in the correct addresses. And that is it. I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to save one last time. Important thing to point out, short of this first field, there are no explicitly required fields. That doesn't mean that we don't expect answers for those fields. It just means that the technology is not specifically forbidding you from submitting your application without values in those fields. So I'll hit save. Let's say that I am wanting to come back to this application. I'm going to continue to work on it, or I need to review it with someone before I submit it. I can hit close after I've hit save. Another little quirk of the system with the technology is it is not acknowledging the save, which is very disconcerting. But what I ask you to do is to say no, hit save one last time, press close, and say yes. So again, I wish I had a better solution for you than that. It's just not updating the property where it knows that it has been saved. You'll notice after I've done that, again, we're on the RFP site. And click on a link from the agency dashboard if we logged in, got to the SIF RFP subsite. Under the applications heading, this is called the web part, you'll see the name of my application, which I have in progress, and you'll see that under application status, it is in draft. While it's in draft, I can continue to go into the application and work on it within the application period, so before January 11th. When I am ready to submit, you can do that simply by hitting the submit button. Once I've done that, you'll see that the application status is changed to submitted. You will not receive an email confirming the submit, but if you do see that your application has a submitted value in the application status field, that is your confirmation that it has been submitted and will be reviewed by staff. When you go back into it, you'll note that it's in a read-only state. If you do submit prematurely, you accidentally hit the submit button, or you decide within the grant application period before January 11th, you want to make changes, we can revert the status. We can put it back into draft status for you. It's not something you can do yourself. You would just contact us at support@unitedwaytwincities.org. Last comment I will make is printing. Printing can be a little tricky. I mentioned before that there is no upfront limit on the length of the narrative responses. You'll see that the text boxes here kind of grow to accommodate all of the content that you put into the response field. The one issue here, you get to a print preview mode, which is a print optimized view of the application form. The one issue here is that an individual text box cannot print over one page. What happens is it gets cut off. The browser doesn't know to carry over that content to the next page. It is there. It will be reviewed. There is a workaround I can provide for you. It's a little bit too complex for me to explain. You need to do it yourself. If you have issues printing, contact support@unitedwaytwincities.org. We can give you an electronic copy of your application. And that's really it.
Application questions? Yeah, microphone is 2 seconds away. Great.
Just a small one, but
I noticed at least on one of those application upload, or not application, I mean supporting documents things, it asked for, it looked like perhaps like multiple, budget documents or something. Can you add more than one, document upload for each of those clicks? Like when you say click here to attach file, could you attach more than one file for some of those, or is that?
So that's a good question. Each box can only get one file.
Okay.
So in the case here, I think these are all optional. So there are 3 boxes for you to submit. Another option, again, maybe local IT probably could help you with this. There are ways of combining documents into one file. You certainly could do that because the limitation here is on the file, not how many documents.
I just noticed there's one that asks for like a 990 and your audited financials, which so you would want to combine this in one PDF.
Yeah,
Do you want to scroll down to the budget?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly, if there are, we thought we had it covered, but if there are insufficient boxes, we can certainly add more. So right here, so you would put both an A133 and a 990, is that what? Okay,
right.
So we'll add another box there. By the time you log in, you'll see 2 boxes there.
Other application questions?
For the organization budget attachment, our fiscal year end is December 31st. So would you prefer the planned 2013 budget or our current 2012 budget?
I think your planned 2013, if you're December 31, and if you've got preliminary 2012 financials of some sort, when you get to January 11th, kind of early, but.
Anything else on the application front? So we did get one question in via the webinar around what do we mean by scale best practices. So one of the concerns is that it's a 2-year award period, and if you're starting in April of 2013, how do you effectively take a program to scale considering budget limitations and other things? So a few ways. It obviously depends on the program that you're proposing. So if you have a current program and you want to take that to scale, we'll be very interested in year 1, what you're implementing, and in year 2, how that program gets bigger in some way, additional sites, additional numbers of kids. We can work through that in terms of your program design and ultimately through the evaluation component as well, but that is something that's core to the Social Innovation Fund. So as you design your program, make sure that you're paying attention to that and read thoroughly through the RFP. I see a potential another question heading my way. So the question is, what if your program provides in-home service rather than a location site? So that is something that you should detail within your program design. Something this might be some home visiting models. So detail that in your program design, and then should we move forward with funding in that regard, we would work out the right system to make sure that we're tracking accurately. But again, it would have to be within Minneapolis and St. Paul as the urban core of this particular opportunity. Other questions about anything SIF related? Yeah.
Hi. What if you end up contracting on multiple RFPs? Would you only count your individuals on one of the RFPs? Just let's say you get awarded as a contractor on multiple different RFPs.
So it would depend on what services you're delivering and to whom, right? So we'd be interested in making sure that it was, again, unique individuals, not duplicated services. And that is something we will be paying attention to, which means that collaboration and that partnership is going to be absolutely key when you describe that, because we don't want to throw proposals out based on that duplication. And that will be something we really will be looking at and talking about. So make sure that you're coordinating efforts and the partners are talking so that you know what you're proposing and who you're delivering services to. Anything else? We're available. Email us. I'm on my iPhone a little bit too much, so you'll get a pretty swift response if something comes through, or Elise or Michael, or the Michaels, I should say, will help answer questions if it's related to IT evaluation or anything else. Good luck to all of you. I hope we didn't scare you off this morning. We're really excited to see programs that come through. And again, we're here to help if you have questions. And thanks for sitting with us for 2.5 hours.